The elderly guy entered the courtroom in handcuffs, his wrinkled face downcast. "Name?" the clerk asked. He responded with a shaky voice. "Henry Quinn, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps." Nobody expected what occurred next. Minutes later, as the female judge studied his papers, she froze, her face losing color. "That moniker belongs to the man who saved her brother's life on the battlefield in Fallujah before making the ultimate sacrifice. Type respect if you feel that honor does not vanish as we age or become poor." Henry Quinn, aged 69, sat on the courthouse bench. His shoulders dropped beneath a worn military dénouement that was 2 sizes too large. The harsh fluorescent lighting highlighted deep lines etched by time and hardship over his once proud face. He stood erect in dress blues decades ago, medals glittering on his chest. Today, while he waited for judgment in clothes obtained from a shelter donation bin, the bailiff referred to his case number, docket 47B, City vs. Henry Quinn. Disruption of peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. Henry walked forward, his motion stiff from arthritis and previous injuries that had never fully healed, Vietnam first, then Iraq for his second tour. Wounds, both apparent and invisible, have been carried silently for decades. "Missed?" Quinn, the prosecutor began, a young man with perfect teeth dressed in a stylish suit who had been repeatedly admonished not to lurk behind the Jefferson Street Cafe. "The owner has filed 3 complaints this month alone." What the prosecutor failed to mention was that Henry had simply been sitting peacefully outside the cafe's dumpster, warming himself by the kitchen exhaust vent on particularly chilly evenings. He never panhandled or disturbed people, he only wanted a bit of warmth when December temperatures dropped below freezing. Officer Samuel Reynolds, who had made the arrest, testified next. He discovered the defendant behind the cafe at 11:45 p.m. He refused to leave the premises. Henry had not refused to do as ordered. He had only requested for 5 more minutes to complete the half sandwich that the cook had discreetly handed him. But debating seemed meaningless today, as it had before. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "this is the defendant's 3rd citation this year. We recommend community service and a 30-day no-trespass order for the downtown commercial district. A no-trespass order would prevent Henry from accessing the shelter on 4th Street, which had been his sole warm bed in months. There would be no meals at St. Luke's Church on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It would imply complete seclusion throughout the coldest period of the winter." "Missed?" Quinn Judge Margaret Parker confronted him directly. "Do you have representation today?" Henry shakes his head. The public defender assigned to him was summoned to another courthouse for an emergency hearing. "Do you wish to make a statement on your own behalf?" the judge inquired, gazing through half-moon reading glasses. Henry cleared his throat, his voice hoarse from disuse. "No excuses, Your Honor. Simply trying to remain warm." "Is there any special reason you chose that location?" the judge pressed. Something inscrutable flickered across her stern expression. "The cook." Henry paused. "Jimmy occasionally leaves food. I've known him since he was a kid. His father joined me in Desert Storm." "And your military service?" Judge Parker inquired, despite the fact that this material is rarely relevant in such hearings. "United States Marine Corps, 1975 to 1995. Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Iraq." The words came spontaneously. A moment of clarity and pride in the midst of chaos. The judge took a note and then continued to peruse the paperwork. Something about Henry's personnel file seemed to capture her eye. Before she could finish speaking, the courtroom doors opened. A distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit entered. Approaching the public defender's table, he set down a leather briefcase and addressed the court. "Raymond Rossi represents the defendant before you, Your Honor. I apologize for interrupting, but I have been retained to represent Mr. Quinn." Henry looked up in confusion. He had not phoned anyone. "I couldn't afford a lawyer, especially with such a costly suit. This is exceedingly unusual." "Missed?" Rossi. Judge Parker stated that the court was not notified of this representation. Your Honor, this is a relatively recent development. Rossi responded smoothly. I would like to seek a brief recess to consult with my client. Judge Parker observed the lawyer. Then Henry, her expression was unreadable. The court will take a 15-minute recess, she stated, rising abruptly and disappearing into her chambers. Henry turned to face the guy beside him. I don't have the money for a lawyer. You don't need any, Rossi said gently. The firm of Williams, Rossi, and Parker is handling your case pro gratis, Henry grimaced at the name. Parker. Like the judge. Rossi confirmed, exactly like the judge. Judge Margaret Parker trembled as she removed her glasses in her chambers. After 20 years on the bench, she had learned to keep her cool no matter what happened in front of her. However, nothing had prepared her for this moment. She repeated to herself, it can't be the same man, even if the details were too exact. She unlocked her desk drawer and took out a weathered photograph of herself as a young woman standing next to her brother, Lieutenant Daniel Parker, in his Marine dress uniform. At his commissioning ceremony, he had his arm around her shoulders and they were both beaming widely. Daniel's last letter home from Iraq stood near the photograph, the paper worn from several readings. In it, he recalled a confrontation outside Fallujah in which his unit was pinned down by insurgent fire. None of us would have survived if Daniel hadn't written to Staff Sergeant Quinn. He sprinted across open ground, under heavy fire, to find a fallen Marine. He then provided cover fire, allowing us to evacuate our injured. 2 weeks after sending that letter, Daniel was killed by an IED. Margaret remembered the military burial, the folded flag given to her parents, and the Marine who approached them later. Your youngster has saved my life. He had previously indicated that I was the one he had pulled to safety. The Marine had not completed the sentence and did not need to. The Marine's name had been Henry Quinn. Margaret attempted to contact him after the funeral, seeking to know more about her brother's final days. However, the military explained that Sergeant Quinn had been sent again immediately. Later inquiry found that he was honorably discharged after suffering severe PTSD and a catastrophic brain damage during his final tour. And now, 20 years later, he was in her courtroom, destitute, alone, and unacknowledged. A knock on the door stopped her thoughts. Raymond Rossi entered with a troubled expression. Margaret, what's going on? He asked. As her late husband's old legal partner and family friend, he was one of the few persons who addressed her by her first name. It's him, Alex, she said, gesturing to the photograph. The Marine who rescued Daniel. The one who carried Danielson out under fire after he was injured. Rossi's eyes grew wider as he connected the dots. Is the homeless veteran in your courtroom Henry Quinn? You've been looking for this person for years. Margaret nodded, his service record proves it. Fallujah. 2004. Same unit as Daniel. Daniel received the Silver Star for the actions stated in his letters. Does he know who you are? I do not think so. I married Thomas after law school. I changed my name to Parker. And it's been 20 years. She paused to collect herself. What has happened to him, Alex? How did a decorated Marine find up homeless and in my courtroom while attempting to remain warm? Rossi shakes his head. According to what I gathered throughout our little talk, he suffered from severe PTSD following his final deployment. His wife fled while he was deployed. VA benefits were enmeshed in bureaucracy. He worked in construction for years before physical labor became impossible due to service-related ailments. The rest followed the regular pattern of employment loss. Foreclosures lead to the streets. Margaret closed her eyes and recalled her brother's remarks. Quinn is the best among us. The kind who would offer anything for his Marines without hesitation. If I can be half the officer he is as an NCO, I will consider myself successful. What are you planning to do? Rossi asked kindly. You could recuse yourself. No. Margaret responded fiercely. I'm not letting him get away again. I understand there are ethical considerations here. She straightened, and the judge's demeanor returned. But there are ethical issues in how we respect people who have given all for our country. When Judge Parker returned to the courtroom, she maintained an immaculate posture. Her expression is neutral. Those who knew her well may have detected a tiny tremble in her hands as she placed papers in front of her. Mr. Rossi. Has your client decided how he wants to proceed? She asked officially. The lawyer stood. Your Honor, we respectfully request that all charges be dismissed. My customer was simply looking for shelter from severely chilly temperatures. A fundamental human necessity. Furthermore, we can show that was missing. Quinn had the implied approval of restaurant personnel to be on the premises. The prosecutor started to protest. But Judge Parker did raise her hand slightly, silencing him. Before I rule, I'd want to ask the defendant a few questions. She focused her attention on Henry. Mr. Monco. Quinn. Your military record indicates that you served in Fallujah in 2004. Is this correct? Henry straightened slightly. Muscle memory from decades of military service briefly helped him overcome his current condition. Yes, Your Honor. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. And were you participating in an operation on April 17, 2004, on the city's western outskirts? Henry's aged face showed confusion. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a convoy when we encountered heavy fire. Throughout the conversation, the judge maintained a surprisingly consistent tone. Did you rescue a wounded Marine, Lieutenant Daniel Parker, while under enemy fire? The courtroom went silent. Henry's eyes narrowed as memories washed over him. Lieutenant Parker, he explained softly. Yes, young cop. Good day, guy. He was hit while attempting to reach an injured corpsman. Henry's gaze got distant. I got to him. He was pulled behind a wall. He kept telling me to leave him and get the others out first. In the gallery, a silver-haired man wearing a Marine Corps lead danielet leaned forward. Suddenly focused on the proceedings. So what happened to Lieutenant Parker? Judge Margaret Parker inquired, her professional mask firmly in place despite the chaos below. We got him to the medevac, Henry said, his voice falling. I heard later that he made it to Germany. A few weeks later, he was back on patrol. His vehicle collided with an IED. Henry's voice crackled slightly. All these years, I've worried if I did more harm than good by getting him out just for him to die later. The silver-haired Marine in the gallery stood up, unable to control himself. That's him, he said loudly. That's Staff Sergeant Quinn. I was present that day. He saved all 6 of us. Judge Parker struck her gavel once, sharply. She yelled, order, but her voice lacked the normal authority. The courtroom grew quiet. Tension hummed through the air. Henry Quinn stared at the floor. Uncomfortable with the sudden attention, the silver-haired Marine stood defiantly. Your Honor, the prosecutor intervened. While Mr. Quinn's military service is commendable, it has no bearing. The court disagrees. Judge Parker intervened. It has every bearing. She lowered her gavel deliberately. This court will recess for 10 minutes. Bailiff, please keep Mr. Quinn in the courtroom. As she stood to depart, she halted and made unprecedented eye contact with the defendant, Mr. Quinn. When I return, we will need to discuss topics other than these charges. Margaret's professional demeanor ultimately wore thin in her chambers. She pushed shaking fingers to her lips, restraining emotions that had waited 2 decades to be expressed. After taking several deep breaths, she reached for her phone. Colonel Matthews? Margaret Parker. Yes, I realize it has been years. Listen, I need a favor now. Judge Parker returned exactly 10 minutes later, and she was not alone. Behind her strode 3 uniformed Marines, a full colonel, a master sergeant, and a corporal carrying a polished wooden case. The courtroom shook, with whispers echoing through the gallery. Henry Quinn stood reflexively as he saw the uniforms. Judge Parker took her seat in front of the crowded room, muscle memory taking precedence over physical agony. For the first time in her judicial career, she removed her glasses and addressed the court as a human person rather than a judge. "Before starting, I must share a personal matter related to this case," she began. "The Lieutenant Daniel Parker mentioned by the defendant is my brother." A wave of muttering surged through the courtroom. Henry's eyes widened, understanding and confusion clashing over his features. "My brother wrote to our family 20 years ago about a staff sergeant who saved his life in Fallujah, a man who rushed through enemy fire to reach him after he was injured and provided cover fire to allow others to escape." Her voice was extremely steady. "That was Sergeant Henry Quinn." The silver-haired Marine from the gallery exclaimed, "It's true, Your Honor. I was there." Quinn was hit twice, forcing the lieutenant to cover. Judge Parker gave a nod of acknowledgement. 2 weeks later, my brother was killed in action. At his funeral, several Marines approached our family to share stories of Daniel's bravery, as well as to tell us about the staff sergeant who had saved him during the earlier combat, providing our family 2 weeks with Daniel that we would not have had otherwise. She was now looking directly at Henry. "After my brother died, I tried to find you, Sergeant Quinn. The Marine Corps notified me that you had been redeployed immediately. Years later, they informed me that you had been discharged but could not provide your location." Henry stood motionless, his aged face a mask of conflicted feelings. "I never stopped seeking," Judge Parker said, "and now, by what can only be described as fate or divine intervention, you are in my courtroom." She motioned to the colonel, who moved forward. "Colonel Samuel Edgar was my brother's commanding officer. He's got something to say." Colonel Edgar approached the benches. "Staff Sergeant Quinn, the Marine Corps has been searching for you for several years. Your file was one of many highlighted for review under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. New information about your service in Iraq and Afghanistan prompted an evaluation of your decorations and benefit status." The corporal went forward and opened the wooden case he was carrying. Inside, there was a medal on a blue ribbon. By direction of the Secretary of the Navy, Staff Sergeant Henry J. Quinn of the United States Marine Corps is thus awarded the Navy Cross in recognition of conspicuous bravery and intrepidity in action on April 17, 2004. A surprised murmur echoed around the courtroom. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, and previously classified intelligence revealed that your actions that day not only saved Lieutenant Parker and 5 other Marines, but also foiled an ambush that would have destroyed the whole convoy. Colonel Edgar indicated that your Silver Star had been enhanced properly. Henry's steely visage eventually cracked. "There's a mistake," he whispered hoarsely. "I was simply doing my job." "No mistakes, Sergeant." The colonel verified, "and it is long overdue." From the gallery, a voice cried out, "Attention on deck." The silver-haired Marine, as well as numerous others in the courtroom who had identifiable military bearings even when dressed in civilian clothes, stood to attention. Rendering salutes to Henry Quinn, others in the courtroom stood one by one until everyone was on their feet, including the prosecutor, who, caught between protocol and human decency, rose with evident respect. Judge Parker, tears streaming freely, addressed the court in an unsteady voice. "In light of these facts, all charges against Staff Sergeant Henry Quinn are dismissed with prejudice." She smacked her gavel with finality. "This court is adjourned." As the formalities were completed, the Master Sergeant approached Henry with a tablet. "Sir, we've been looking for you to complete your revised VA benefits. Your disability rating has been revised as 100% service-connected, retroactive to your discharge date." "What does this mean?" Henry inquired, still overwhelmed. "It entails significant back pay, sir, as well as full medical care, a housing allowance, and educational perks, if you choose to use them." Raymond Rossi moved forward. "And our firm will ensure that everything is handled right away." Missed. Quinn. No more bureaucratic delays. Jimmy, the cook who had been leaving meals for Henry, entered from the back of the courtroom, his eyes filled with grief. My father always told there was a Marine who saved his entire unit, and that if I ever met Henry Quinn, I owed him everything. He extended his hand, not realizing it was you the entire time. The prosecutor, clearly moved, approached Henry as well. Sir, no one had any notion. Please accept my apologies for the way this situation was handled. Henry stood in the midst of the unexpected attention, dignity returning to his posture with each passing instant, as if the weight of unacknowledged honor had been lifted from his shoulders. Judge Parker descended from the bench, professional distance abandoned. She paused before Henry, her words faint yet clear. My brother stated that you told him something when you brought him to safety. You said that no Marine would be left behind while I was breathing. Today, Sergeant Quinn, we finally keep our commitment to you. Henry Quinn stood in front of a mirror 2 weeks later, still unable to believe it was his place. The Veterans Affairs housing program had accelerated his application, putting him in a one-bedroom flat in a building created particularly for formerly homeless veterans. The walls were barren, save for one frame displaying his newly received Navy Cross, as well as his original Purple Hearts and military medals, which Raymond Rossi had retrieved from a storage unit auctioned off years ago. A knock on the door stopped his thoughts. Judge Margaret Parker stood in the corridor, dressed in casual attire and carrying a little box. Can I come in, Sergeant Quinn? She asked. Henry escorted her inside, still uneasy about his sudden change of circumstances. Please, just Henry is fine, Your Honor. Then I'm just Margaret, she said with a slight smile. Outside my courtroom, they sat in a small living room, the awkwardness of their odd relationship hanging between them. Margaret opened the package and took out a stack of letters. These come from Daniel. He wrote to our family every week while deployed. She gave one to Henry. This one is about you especially. It was written the day after you had saved him. Henry's hands trembled slightly as he unfurled the newspaper. Lieutenant Parker's handwriting was crisp and precise, exactly as Henry remembered from field reports. Mom and Dad, he read aloud, don't be concerned about what you're hearing on the news. I am safe owing to one of my NCOs. Staff Sergeant Quinn accomplished something yesterday. I still cannot believe it. When our unit was hit, he moved through fire that would have killed anyone. He refused to leave me, even when I commanded him to. He stated that no Marine will be left behind under his watch. Henry's voice wavered. Margaret replied softly, he wrote about you often. He said you were the type of Marine he hoped to be. Henry replied that he was a decent officer, however young, who cared for his soldiers. That's unusual. After we lost Daniel, I attended law school. Margaret motioned toward the apartment. All of this, including the Veterans Court program and the housing project, sprang from what Daniel wrote about you, about how the system sometimes fails even its heroes. Henry turned aside, uncomfortable with such recognition. I am no hero. I simply completed the tasks at hand. Margaret responded gently, that is what heroes always say. She paused, then added, there's something else you should know. The day Daniel died, he was conducting a patrol to locate an insurgent cell that was attacking civilians. He volunteered for the mission. In his most recent letter home, he stated that he was attempting to follow your example. This realization struck Henry harder than any physical impact. For 20 years, he bore the burden of survivor's guilt, wondering if saving the lieutenant had merely delayed the inevitable, and if his efforts had been futile in the chaos of battle. He did not die because of you, Henry, Margaret murmured, appearing to read his mind. He lived as he did because of you. They sat in silence, two people united by loss and honor throughout the years. Outside, snow began to fall gently, covering the city in silent white. Finally, Henry said, barely above a whisper. All these years on the street, I kept wondering if anyone recalled that it all meant nothing in the end. It meant everything. Margaret reassured him. To Daniel. To the other Marines. To me. Margaret softly touched Henry's shoulder as she prepared to depart. Daniel always stated that the true test of a Marine is what they do when no one is looking. You lived the truth. Even when the world turned away, Henry stood straighter than he had in years, his mute dignity returning. Someone recalled my name, he explained simply. After all these years, someone remembers. In that peaceful moment, something long broken began to heal, not only for Henry Quinn, but for everyone impacted by his unacknowledged honor. Some people rescue others' lives but spend their entire lives alone, forgotten. Honor doesn't necessitate glory. Sometimes only a moment of acknowledgement is enough to restore someone's confidence. I do not want anyone left behind. Every person deserves to be heard and appreciated. If you agree, leave a respectful remark to express that you support compassion and justice. Don't forget to subscribe to TLSTRNGTH for more heartfelt stories.